All right, good morning. Looks like we're a small group this morning. We're still working on the topic of Christian anti-Semitism, which in many ways is kind of an oxymoron. And last week we covered some quote-unquote saints of the Catholic Church. Athanasius, Jerome, and John Chrysostom. And they've all been canonized. And they all had very, let's say, not very nice things to say about the Jewish people. And this was kind of indicative of what you would find in early Christianity. So just as a review, just some of the things that Athanasius said, he taught that the Jews are worse than demons and that it is allowed to persecute them in cold blood because they have no future, either on earth or in heaven. Jerome, who is the author of the Latin Vulgate Bible, the Bible used by the Roman Catholics, Jerome called the Jews two-legged, thistle-eating donkeys and animals to be slaughtered for hell. But that's kind of nothing compared to this quote-unquote saint, John Chrysostom, Patriarch of Constantinople, who gave a series of lectures called Against the Jews, 8 sermons, and this was just kind of a little few snippets from Against the Jews by St. John Chrysostom. Certainly it is the time for me to show that demons dwell in the synagogue, not only in the place itself, but also in the souls of the Jews. Do you see that demons dwell in their souls and that these demons are more dangerous than the ones of old? Here he talks about how the Jews are fit for killing, kind of comparing them to a calf fat for slaughter. And here he's talking about the synagogue is not only a brothel and a theater, but is also a den of robbers, a lodging of wild beasts. Here he calls the Jewish people dogs. And here's just kind of a summary of what we just covered. So this is, let's see, about the 4th century, 5th century. He's just tipping right into the beginning of the 5th century there, 347 to 407. And I had mentioned that, okay, it's one thing if you want to speak bad of a person, if you want to speak bad of a group or another religion from a theological standpoint, okay, that's one thing. But it's another thing to then weaponize those words. And the only way these words were going to be weaponized was if, well, the unthinkable happened, which happened. We began talking about Constantine the Great, the Roman general who had this vision prior to a very decisive battle for the city of Rome. He saw this vision in the sky, a cross with the words, "In this conquer." And I think it was in hoc signa vinces. Anyone know Latin? I think that's in this sign conquer, or you'll be you'll be victorious. And here he is with his trademark sword, and he then became the sole emperor of the Roman Empire. And he later tried to connect, well, he did not try, he did connect the sign in the sky of a cross with Christianity and the cross upon which Jesus was crucified. And this is possibly what he saw. It's referred to as sundog. It does kind of look like a cross, doesn't it, when you look at it? So it's possible he saw that. So this vision he had was around 312 AD, and Constantine, after quote unquote, recognizing that the sign can be attributed to the God of the Christians, Constantine started to favor the Christian church. He removed all the persecution that the Christians were facing at that point. He had issued an edict of toleration. The Christians were not to be persecuted. Anything that had been taken or destroyed, they should have been compensated for. And he then starts showering the Christian church with gifts, gold, money, making the bishops tax exempt, having multiple copies of the scriptures copied out and given as gifts to the churches. And he started taking interest in the doctrinal decisions and controversies of the day. 5 years later, he issues this coin, and Constantine's on the left side, and on the right side is the image of the sun god, Sol Invictus. So this is Constantine 5 years after he had his supposed conversion to Christianity. So it kind of gives you a little bit of a taste of Constantine. Why I bring him into the picture? Well, I said, words, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. That's fine. But now we have potential of literal sticks and stones, or let's say the weapons that could hurt your body. Here we're talking about an emperor who has the total control of the Roman legions. And he imbibes the hatred of the Jewish people that you saw in those words from Jerome, John Chrysostom, and Athanasius. And this is where it becomes very dangerous, when the Jews are really having to look over their back, because there's one thing, again, to call you a bad word. It's another thing if I actually had the power to punish you, even kill you. Now the danger has been ratcheted up, tenfold exponentially. Then I shared a little bit of Constantine's words, and I put it in the context of the Easter controversy, which was up to the time of Constantine, the Christians were dependent upon the Jews determining when Passover was, and of course Passover dictates when Easter is. Well, Constantine said we shouldn't have anything to do with the Jews. We are superior to the Jews. We shouldn't be waiting for them to tell us when to worship. So Constantine divorced Easter from Passover, which is why sometimes you could have an entire month between Easter and Passover. Anyway, in this proclamation by Constantine, he laid out his hatred toward the Jewish people. Here he kind of just summarized the controversy had broken out on the subject of the most holy day of Easter. And it says, it's unworthy to observe that most sacred festival in accordance with the practice of the Jews, having sullied their own hands with a heinous crime, and bloodstained men are, as one might expect, mentally blind. It is possible now that their nation has been rejected by a truer system, which we have kept from the first day. And the last thing he says here is, let there be nothing in common between you and the detestable mob of the Jews. And then he goes on, even attacks them even more. We're not going to cover it all. So this is where anti-Semitism goes from the theological to the political. And this is where it's really dangerous for the Jewish people. And this is where Christianity then, if it didn't already have a black eye, I mean, it now has two black eyes. Because now you have this union of church and state, and now the state is speaking in very threatening tones toward the Jewish people. And I brought this video from National Cemetery, Arlington National Cemetery, and this is just a kind of I call a symbol of what happened to Christianity. You see the cross, and then on the backside, you see this sword. You can go up to Arlington National Cemetery and you can see this. So now we have Christianity weaponized. There's a better view of it. So that was, I got this picture here. If you looked at that, what is that? Is that a sword or is that a cross? Or all the above? Yeah, it's kind of a morphing of the sword of the state with the cross, the symbol of Christianity. Having said that, the cross was not a symbol of Christianity. prior to Constantine. What were symbols of Christianity that you would find in their artwork? Randy? Fish is one. There's others. Sheep and a shepherd. Okay. You can thank Constantine for not only weaponizing Christianity, but for making the cross a symbol of Christianity. And here's the problem. The cross looks a whole lot like the sword, doesn't it? I said Christian anti-Semitism. It sounds like an oxymoron. You wouldn't think Christians would be hating people based upon their race. I think I jumped ahead here. What I wanted to do was show you a video of Constantine and give you a better flavor of what he was like. So this is about a 7-minute video, and this will give you a nice taste of Constantine, and also what I was just talking about, the weaponization of Christianity, and how it fits into the topic of anti-Semitism. We just blow. All right, let's try it again. All right, so we have audio.
And who is that?
Fausta, Constantine's second wife.
So that's Constantine.
Yes, and this is Crispus, the son of the first wife of Constantine. Crispus looks like his father.
Indeed. What happened to him?
He was killed by his father.
In the Roman baths that Constantine built in Trier, I met his biographer, Jan Drivers.
He ordered his eldest son, Crispus, to be killed.
Why?
One of the reasons may have been a relationship between Crispus and Constantine's wife, Fausta.
So what happened to Fausta?
She was killed also in an overheated bathroom on the order of Constantine.
So in this 1 year, he orders the execution both of his son and of his wife.
Yes. It makes you actually wonder what kind of person Constantine was. A ruthless and perhaps violent person. Quite another person from the saint Constantine, the image a lot of people have. There's even a source which says that Constantine had committed so many sins that there was no religion that could forgive his sins, only Christianity.
And then he told me the most surprising thing, that the cross had never been an important Christian symbol until Constantine, in the year 326. For 2.5 centuries, Christians had used symbols of life, the fish, the lamb, the shepherd. Now this image of execution is brought in to unify the empire under a single orthodox doctrine. And why wouldn't Constantine, a man who had murdered a son, be drawn to a God who required the death on the cross of his son?
The finding of the cross at Golgotha proved, of course, that the Jews actually had killed Christ. It was used in that way. You could see the Christians could now say, here is the cross, here is the cross. The Roman emperors become influenced by that. And you see that gradually the Jews become a marginal group in the Roman Empire. The church fathers against Jews and Judaism.
In an empire united under the cross, Jews were now in danger. They might well have been wiped out right then, but church fathers decided the Jews should wander in misery forever without a home. The Roman Empire fell despite its embracing Christianity. The Western world descended into chaos that lasted for 6 centuries. Then the Pope cried, "God wills it," calling for a crusade a war of the cross against Islam. Europe's princes and their armies stopped fighting each other. They set out to fight Muslims in the Holy Land, but turned first on the infidels they knew along the Rhine.
When I was a kid, the Crusader castles were the point of this river. I loved it. Now I know. These communities up and down the Rhine here all date back to the 11th century. These towns included some of the most thriving Jewish centers in the world. And in the spring of 1096, in a short 6-week period, beginning in Cologne, upriver, and going all the way down to Mainz, downriver, those Jewish communities were wiped out by Crusader mobs, people wearing the sign of the cross on their shields and on their breasts.
I had heard that Jews had been invited here before the year 1000 to help the bishop conduct his financial affairs, and had made the mistake of thriving. I wondered if the State Archive in Trier had records of what happened here during the Crusades.
There is an old chronicle. See, it's says here Gesta Treverorum on the top, and here
Treverorum is the word for
Trier. It's the Latin for Trier, and it's all handwritten. I can show you a few examples.
And are there references to Jews in this?
Yes, there are references to Jews, and the eldest references are from the year 1066.
That's about 30 years before the Crusade.
Yeah, because the Jews for centuries had been made responsible for anything which happened to a town, whether it was sicknesses or whether it was war or whether the water was foul or whatever it was always the Jews' fault. And so also these crowds, they attacked the Jews. And so some of the Jews committed suicide, and some of them threw their children in the river. It's written here in these very clear words, you know, so that it didn't, because the parents didn't want them to get baptized.
The accounts of the Rhineland Crusade in the Trier Archive aren't widely known. But Cardinal Karl Lehmann, one of the most powerful men in the church today, is facing the facts. The same scene that took place in each of the towns along the Rhine was played out long ago here in the courtyard of his cathedral. Jews had begged the bishop to protect them from the Crusader mobs. Lehmann's medieval predecessor told them, only the converted can be saved. The rest would have to die.
Es ist eben nicht immer gelungen, sie zu schützen.
I was a young Catholic brought into this perfect church. It was the place that human beings were entirely pure. We had saints. We knew who they were. And our priests and our bishops and our popes were holy, holy men. I hadn't a clue about the failure. Priests now, I know, leading crusaders into this very territory to kill Jews.
So that gives you a little bit of a taste of Constantine and the results of weaponizing Christianity. We have Christians going into battle bearing the sign of Jesus, the cross, on their shields, on their helmets, going out in the name of the Lord, slaughtering the Jews. Joe?
Just so I understand the larger context. So after the fall of Rome, you know, it was chaos for many, many years. I don't know the exact date of when that happened. I thought it was like in the 1500s, but you're saying the Crusades began in 1100, so.
1096, I believe, was the first crusade.
Yeah, so was this an effort for Europe to say, let's stop fighting each other, let's find somebody else to blame and somebody else to fight because they had gotten so weak, or what was the real impetus behind it, because it was very costly and very time consuming
Yeah.
to send whole armies from France and England and Germany all the way to Palestine. So what was really the driving force behind it?
Well, religion and money.
But who?
So,
Who?
yeah, it's true. You'd have battling factions within Europe, no question. Anytime you've got a large expanse after the fall of the Roman Empire, you're going to have, the 10 toes. You're going to have this dismemberment of the two. You'd have the East and the West Roman Empire, and after that fell, you have a dissolution into smaller, some small, some larger, some strong, some weak. So there would be battling over this time period. What united them was this event, the Muslims took over in the Holy Land, and word got back that the pilgrims going to Jerusalem, to the Holy Land, were being prohibited from, completing their pilgrimage. So this riled the feathers of the Pope.
What year was that?
Well, the first crusade was 1096, so I don't know. Preceding that, we're talking about the build-up of the news. It just wasn't like you read it in the internet, so
I know.
Years, a decade, whatever. But by 1096, the Pope said, "We're going to put my foot down," and Louis or John, I forgot the man's name, James Carroll, he said, quoting, "The Lord wills it," or "God wills it." Those are the words on the proclamation by the Pope declaring a crusade against the Muslims. God wills it. Now that proclamation united all the warring factions in what we know today as Europe. So it was kind of convenient way of stopping the fighting, and focusing your attention on a greater enemy, the enemy of Christianity, the Muslims now. But as they were going toward the east, they come down the Rhine, and they realized, well, there's enemies in our own land. Let's take care of them. We're already equipped to do battle. We can just simply pull the boat over, wipe out the Jews, and we'll continue on our merry way to the Holy Land. All along the way, you're going to be picking up booty. So that's where I'm saying you're going to have money involved too. So you got the religious and you have the monetary, financial dimensions. I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, the question number 2 was, so they're all floating down the Rhine, ending in the Black Sea, and then going through Anatolia to get there, or?
I don't know the route. All I know is that you're going down the Rhine in order to head east to the Holy Land. And as they're going down, they recognize we have enemies, religious enemies against Christianity. Why don't we take care of them? We'll kill 2 birds with 1 stone.
Yep. So I guess the last question is, what was the end game with the crusade? What were they sent there to accomplish? Just take back Jerusalem?
To take out the Muslims and to drive them out of the Holy Land.
To retake Jerusalem specifically, or the whole land?
Well, Jerusalem specifically, but I'm sure pilgrimages would have occurred, let's say, in various cities, maybe in Nazareth, Jesus' birthplace. I mean, I'm not into Roman Catholic pilgrimages, but I would imagine any holy spots would have been the targets or the destinations of a pilgrimage. So that kind of gives you the background. But the point is, we now have Christianity where it's not just a matter of debating words. We've weaponized Christianity because the church has been basically sewn to the hip of the state. Okay. So this is where we get, this is a very dangerous stage of anti-Semitism, because now we're talking about more than just words. So as I mentioned, it was James Carroll's the narrator on this video. It's from a video called Constantine's Sword, which comes from a huge, like a 2-inch thick book that James Carroll wrote called same Constantine's Sword. And it really just traces the weaponization of the Roman Catholic Church and the anti-Semitism that you find developing out of Christianity. And James Carroll kind of ended with the words, "I hadn't a clue of the failure." And I think that's kind of a fitting way to kind of begin wrapping up our study on anti-Semitism. That is, I had not a clue. And I don't know if any of these, these studies on Christianity or Christian anti-Semitism have been helpful to you. I suspect most of you have not had a clue about much of what I've shared with you over the last, 3-4 months. But I think we do need to begin having a clue. We need to be aware of Christian history. Of course, Christadelphians cannot be blamed for this mess, but I think it's useful to know, one of the many reasons we stand apart from mainstream Christianity. This is a legacy of Christianity, the treatment of the Jewish people in such a shameful manner. How much misery Christianity has caused the Jewish people. And it helps you understand why the Jew is not all that crazy about hearing the messages that Christians wish to share with them. And I said earlier that Christian anti-Semitism would seem at first to be an oxymoron, two things that seem to be contradictory or incongruent. Jesus didn't tell us to go around hating a people based upon their race. And Jesus, after all, and his disciples were Jews. So you would think Christian anti-Semitism would be an inconceivable concept, yet you can find the term essentially right here in a modern encyclopedia. This article comes from Wikipedia, and it pretty much summarizes what I've been trying to cover over the last few months. I'm going to read a little bit from here. Some Christian churches, Christian groups, and ordinary Christians express anti-Semitism toward Jews and Judaism. These can be thought of as examples of anti-Semitism expressed by Christians or by Christian communities. However, the term Christian anti-Semitism has also been used to refer to anti-Jewish sentiments that arise out of Christian doctrinal or theological stances. The term is also used to suggest, to some degree, contempt for Jews and Judaism inherent to Christianity as a religion itself, and that centralized institutions of Christian power, as well as governments with strong Christian influence, such as the Catholic monarchs of Spain, have generated societal structures that survive to this day which perpetuate anti-Semitism. This usage appears particularly in discussions of Christian structures of power within society, which are referred to as Christian hegemony or Christian privilege. These are part of a larger discussions of structural inequality and power dynamics. Anyway, that kind of sums up what we've been trying to get across over several weeks. There's this distinction that needs to be made between hating a class of people based upon their race, which would be anti-Semitism, or being opposed to a group based upon their religious beliefs, which would be anti-Judaism. And I tried to make that distinction very early on in this discussion. The problem is when 99% of the Jews practice Judaism, you really can't separate them. You've got the two together. One thing I don't have on my slides, and if I can find my phone, here it is. This weaponization of Christianity, I think you can find this in the book of Revelation, in Revelation 13. And it's interesting, we were talking about earlier the symbols of Christianity prior to Constantine. They were the fish, the shepherd, and the sheep. If you turn to Revelation 13, you start out not with shepherds, sheep, or fish, but instead you see beasts. John saw a beast coming out of the sea having 10 horns, 7 heads, and on his horns 10 diadems, and on his heads were blasphemous names. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion, and the dragon gave him his power and his throne and great authority. So dragons, I don't think, has ever been used as symbols for Christianity. If someone knows, please correct me. If you keep reading here in Revelation 13, you keep going and going and going and going, go down to verse 11, John sees something else. And I saw another beast come up out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb. Okay, a lamb. I can take that. Where does that fit in? Lambs are typically recognized as innocent, tame, peaceful. You normally don't see lambs fighting and chasing after other animals, trying to kill them or devour them like you would expect a dragon or a leopard would. Verse 11, though, what's interesting about this lamb that John describes in Revelation 13:11 is what else the lamb, as far as how it was symbolized. So I'll read 11 again. I saw another beast coming out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb, and, underscore and, he spoke like a dragon. Lambs, they go bah. Now, I don't know how dragons go, but they don't go bah. This lamb spoke however dragons speak. Ferocious, and then moreover, this lamb says he will do, this lamb will exercise all the authority of the first beast in his sight, and he will make the earth and those who live on it to worship the first beast whose death stroke was healed. And he will do great signs that he will even make fire come down out of heaven to the earth in the sight of people. So we have this lamb. It's a symbol of Christianity traditionally, and yet it's behaving very unlike a lamb. It's mimicking the sounds and behavior of a dragon. And you have this clue, it's able to call down fire out of heaven. Now, calling fire out of heaven, does it bring anything to your mind, calling fire down out of heaven? I can think of two other instances, Joe, in the Bible.
And then the second set of 50 men, and also on Mount Carmel, when he called down fire for his offering because they'd slashed themselves all day
So
and didn't come up with anything.
what happened to those that fire came down out of heaven?
They were consumed. The word akal in Hebrew.
They were
to
killed.
Be consumed.
They died. It's a violent death, okay? Any other things that calling fire down, Jason?
So the sons of thunder wanted to call fire down upon the Samaritans.
Yeah, and that's another way, let's wipe them out, Jesus, right? So when you think of calling fire down out of heaven, you should immediately think of destruction, violent destruction, and you should think of somehow it's approved by God. So we have this image of the lamb in Revelation 13 that is not behaving like a lamb. Lambs don't go around calling down fire and saying, shepherd, go, get a flamethrower and kill the wolves. Lambs are just innocent. They're dumb. And yet this lamb is behaving so out of its normal expectation. And I think if you look at what we just viewed, that video of Constantine the Great, this head of the Christian faith is putting a symbol of death as now a replacement for the lamb. He's killing his wife, he's killing his son, he's killing his enemies. And he is a saint, by the way, if I didn't mention that in the Roman Catholic Church. And he is just weaponized Christianity. And you see what happens to Christianity. You now have priests leading crusaders to go wipe out Jews and Muslims. If you had to put this in symbology, wouldn't a lamb behaving and speaking like a dragon and calling fire out of heaven kind of be a good way to symbolize this mess or this video that I just shared? I think so. So this is why we need to be aware of Christian history. It's great and it's important we know our Bible, but I really think we're not going to be fully in tune with God's plan and how it's worked out over the centuries if we don't get exposed to Christian history, even with all its horrible warts. And there's a lot of horrible warts. And this is just one small taste of that, but Constantine, I don't want to make him into a boogeyman, but honestly, Christianity goes a totally different direction than where it was prior to Constantine. And Constantine then passed this on to his sons, who passed it on to their sons, and it just became common that you would defend Christianity through the use of the state and the threat of violence. Jason?
So to say it another way, that you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because obviously Christianity is what Christ gives to us to follow him, right? We become Christians. We are followers of the way. It is the distortion of that way that leads people like Constantine or people through the Crusades to do destructive things that are outside of what God's purpose for a servant of Christ is.
Yes, I agree. And there was two warnings about leaven, the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. And I touched on this a couple weeks ago. The leaven of the Pharisees are the distortion of the teachings of Moses. I tried to make the argument that leaven of Herod is talking about how the state ends up becoming the protector of a particular, in this case, the Sadducees. The Sadducees liked the idea that Herod would use force and keep them in the position of keepers of the temple. But the political leaven and the religious leaven, you mix it together and you basically have a Roman Catholic Church. After the year, 325, you now have the two leavens together in one loaf. And we now have Christianity with this strange taste or flavor or aroma. Yeah, but what do you do? What do you do when you have this loaf infected with all this leaven?
Phil, just real quick, just building on a little bit about the lamb. The horns represent power. Anywhere time we read about these horns or powers, and it's been my understanding that one horn represented the military power and the other one the religious power that was behind it.
Yeah, that could very well be. I don't want to get too far down into the weeds. I want to just have the bigger picture to show, hey, we have a lamb that's not behaving like a lamb, and sure is very militaristic in its behavior. And I think what we're seeing as far as how Christianity then is corrupted by the use of the sword and support of the state fits the symbology you see in Revelation 13. So I appreciate your comments, though. Anything else? Anyone else? All right. I really, really hope we can wrap up next week. I want to get this more personal and bring the Christadelphians into the discussion next week.